Following the deadly terror attack in Sri Lanka, which killed over 253 people, including 38 foreign nationals, the U.S. has issued a second travel advisory for those considering traveling to Sri Lanka. Now, the U.S. Department of State has issued a warning on their website saying, and I quote, "Terror groups continue plotting possible attacks. Terrorists may attack with little or no warning, targeting tourist locations, transportation hubs, markets and other public areas," unquote. The U.S. Foreign Ministry has ordered the departure of all school-age family members of U.S. government employees in kindergarten through 12th grade. The department also authorized the voluntary departure of non-emergency U.S. government employees and family members. The advisory says that the travelers should be aware of their surroundings when traveling to crowded public venues. It urges travelers to follow instructions of local authorities. Travelers have also been advised to review the crime and safety report for Sri Lanka. This is not the first time the U.S. has issued a travel advisory after the terror attacks in Sri Lanka. One day after the country was jolted with multiple bombings, the U.S. had warned tourists of possible attacks and urged increased caution. Meanwhile, France and the Maldives have also issued travel advisories for their citizens. France has asked citizens to stay alert in Sri Lanka. The Maldives has urged tourists to stay away from gatherings and cooperate with local police and army. All right, joining me live is Lawrence Sellen, a retired U.S. Army colonel. Colonel Lawrence, if I can just come to you, but before that, I want to draw a contrast with what happened in the U.S. in 2001 with what happened in Sri Lanka just days ago. Now, we've heard from the Sri Lankan government on a number of occasions in the recent past. Now, the Sri Lankan authorities used 9/11 to sort of build up their campaign against the LTTE in 2009. Now, they're using the same 9/11 attacks to defend themselves this time, saying even the U.S. could not prevent those attacks, so why blame us? Your thoughts?
Well, I think it's difficult to compare those two events. One important difference is that India had provided a number of warnings directly to Sri Lanka in regard to the potential terrorist attacks. Now, originally, I'd give the Sri Lankan government the benefit of the doubt, but the clear indications from India that there was a pending attack and it was a very dangerous situation was quite clear. But it seems that for political disputes within the Sri Lankan government appear to have prevented the government from reacting in a proper way given those Indian warnings. So I don't think they're directly comparable.
Colonel Sellen, in your estimation, do you think the Sri Lankan terror attacks bear all the hallmarks of an Islamic State-inspired attack?
Yes, in general, but there are several different components to this which are becoming apparent and actually quite interesting in terms of how the attacks were carried out. Now, clearly there was a relationship between the individuals responsible in Sri Lanka with certain radical elements in southern India. Now, after the Tamil insurgency and Pakistan's participation in, quote, helping Sri Lanka fight that insurgency, there was a larger presence of Pakistani intelligence within Sri Lanka, and this was projected into southern India. So there is an involvement here, or potential involvement, I should say, of what Pakistani intelligence might know about the situation. Another very interesting component to this is criminal organizations being involved in this. Now, we know there's has been a smuggling operation of drugs between for example, Karachi and Sri Lanka. So it doesn't take a lot of imagination to see that maybe criminal organizations may be involved in moving not only drugs but explosives to these potential activities, and that the Islamic State may have connections with these criminal organizations.
Colonel, you spoke about Pakistan, which brings me to my next logical question. Given the linkages that one is talking about, be it drug cartels or even state support, so to speak, to terrorists and terror groups across the world, including in Sri Lanka, as you mentioned, how should the world respond to this challenge? How should the world handle Pakistan going forward?
Well, I think it's quite clear that, for example, Pakistan supports the Taliban, and the Taliban uses drug smuggling to support its operations in Afghanistan. Also, Pakistan is harboring terrorists which attacks India. So, again, it's not a stretch of the imagination to believe that Pakistan might be involved in what is happening between the Islamic State and the attacks in Sri Lanka. So I think the international community should be applying great pressure on Pakistan in terms of severe economic sanctions and other restrictions against the Pakistani government because of their potential involvement in these things. And some of them are not potential, but are quite clear.
Colonel, if, as you say, there is reasonable suspicion and enough circumstantial evidence to point fingers at Pakistan, why is the US so reluctant to call Pakistan's bluff? We see it happening in Sri Lanka, we see it happening in India, we see it happening in Afghanistan. Pakistan, by all measure, is seen to be the epicenter of terror in India's neighborhood. So why is US so reluctant to call Pakistan's bluff?
Well, I don't know. I ask myself that question almost every day, but I think the obvious answer, at least in the present time, is that the United States sees Pakistan as important to some kind of solution to the conflict in Afghanistan. Now, I would argue against that is that Pakistan has actually been promoting that fight in Afghanistan, and the Taliban are merely Pakistani proxies. So in the long term, I don't see why the United States doesn't apply much greater pressure against Pakistan. And we're starting to see a little bit of that. We know the Trump administration has withdrawn military aid from Pakistan, and just today it was announced by the U.S. government that the visas might be restricted from people coming from Pakistan because of the non-cooperation of the Pakistani government in terms of accepting Pakistanis who have been deported from the United States.
Colonel, we've seen the U.S. declare some countries as state sponsors of terror. For instance, Iran, for instance, Venezuela. In your estimation, is Pakistan a fit case for being designated as a state sponsor of terror?
Well, yes. I think it's quite clear that Pakistan is harboring terrorist organizations on its territory. Just the recent attack in Kashmir is an example of that. There are many other examples, like the 2008 Mumbai attack, which was appeared to be originate in Pakistan, and the long-term support by Pakistan of the Taliban, who were essentially waging a proxy war for Pakistan in Afghanistan. So I think that Pakistan is a state sponsor of terrorism.
And Colonel, very quickly, if we can take a step back and reflect of the events of recent days, how do countries around the world, including India, including the US, confront this challenge of Islamic State? Now, the IS may be on the retreat in Iraq and Syria, but its ideology remains as virulent as ever.
Well, that's true. The Islamic State is more of a brand than an entity. What you have is something like how the mafia is organized. You have individual groups who may have local aspirations, who are at times working together. So I think it behooves countries like the United States, India, and other countries that want to eliminate the threat of the Islamic State to be working together and targeting those individual groups and the associates of those individuals who are making the attacks. And more importantly, the individuals or groups who are financing these terrorist attacks and the nation states who are facilitating them. So I think it has to be a coordinated and extensive effort by countries wishing to eliminate this global threat.
All right, on that note, Colonel Lawrence Sellin, thank you so much for joining us on Wion World is One. Appreciate it. That was Colonel Lawrence Sellin joining us from Montana in the US, and he says that Pakistan is a fit case for being designated as a state sponsor of terrorism.